Welcome to Your Strata Property, the podcast for property owners looking for reliable, accurate, and bite-sized information from an experienced and authoritative source.
Hello and welcome. I'm Amanda Farmer and I have with me today Reena Van Aalst from Strata Central. Welcome, Reena.
Hi, Amanda. How are you?
I'm great. I've been looking forward to our chat. A couple of challenges backing up in our spreadsheet here, and we were just saying off air that once again we were digging around for the week's win, but we found one, absolutely, that we will get to. Jump in with your challenge for me this week.
Well, Amanda, this is probably a challenge that may not apply to many schemes generally, but any of the schemes where an entity is part of what we call a building management committee, which we've spoken about before in our podcast. So basically, a building management committee exists when there's two entities that would share one or more shared facilities. So if you think about these multi-faceted developments where you have perhaps a public car park that's owned by an entity, you might have the residential up top and a hotel or shops in the middle or offices. So that's pretty much the typical type of scenario. But sometimes you may only have one thing being shared or two things being shared. So in these cases, a building management committee is established through a document called the Strata Management Statement. And we've also talked about how these sometimes can be unfair in their allocations. But recently I've had a problem with a BMC that we manage we don't manage the BMC, we manage two of the subsidiary strata schemes. So this actually has 6 entities in this particular BMC. We have some commercial entities and we manage 2 residential schemes. And what's happening is that the BMC manager is directly communicating with the BMC members, not copying us in the emails. And so I had an owner that wanted to do a strata search. And of course, the amount of information that I had was very limited. And I kept on saying, I have to keep asking the members for copies of things, which I shouldn't really have to. And sometimes they share it with me, sometimes they don't, or it just depends on if they remember. And this is actually becoming quite problematic because in anyone that's part of a BMC, the insurance of the building is always going to be held with the BMC. It's never going to be at the strata plan or the strata lot entity because the building has to be insured as one. You can't just split up a building into bits and pieces for insurance purposes. And therefore, normally the BMC budget is usually the highest in any strata scheme because the insurance policy is held there. And then you've got usually fire and other bits and pieces. And so apart from the fact that we need to understand how the BMC is working, the owners have a right to see how that money is being spent at BMC level if they wish to find out. Now, we have committee meetings and the BMC member always gives an update. He's very, very thorough in what he provides to the Strata Committee. But the only people that are copied in on the communications are usually the BMC rep and the alternate rep because most Strata management statements do allow for another person to attend if the main representative is unavailable. So it's actually becoming quite problematic. And I kept on saying to the BMC manager, can you please make sure you copy me in? Oh, yeah. And so sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But, I was just wondering in terms of strata managers, like in the training, it's like, well, if managers were trained correctly, they would know that the entity is the member. It's not the individual. So really, they should be copied in. I should be getting everything. But yeah, I was just wondering, Amanda, if you had this experience in any other, like any clients have come to you or any other schemes that have experienced the same or similar situation.
Yeah, it's a really great point. And coincidentally, just within the last couple of weeks, I have actually had a client of my legal practice come to me. This person owns a property, I'll leave it at that to protect their identity. They own a property that is part of a BMC structure, and this person is actually the BMC rep. So they're attending BMC meetings. They feel like they're involved in the discussions that are going on and they're pretty much up to speed. And this is a complex where the strata manager for the residential, the strata manager for the commercial, and indeed the manager for the BMC is all the one company. So one manager holding all records for everyone. And this client had said to me, Amanda, I would really like to access exactly what you're saying, Reena. I'd like to access invoices. I'd like to know how these big lump sums of money that we're talking about during our BMC meetings, how they're being spent. And I sort of gave the off-the-cuff response, oh, well, you're a BMC member, you're entitled to that. And I went, hang on a sec, where's the law that says that? Because unlike strata schemes, our BMCs are governed by, as you said, the Strata Management Statement That is a document. It's a contract. There is no provision, aside from provisions for the establishment of a building management committee, there's no provision in the legislation giving BMC members rights to access records and access documents, unlike in Strata, where we have a really clear regime for records inspections. And when I had that discussion with this client, I said, look, let's start from a place of just asking the Strata manager, can I please have the following things? And hopefully there's no issue with that and the material is provided, because I don't know how otherwise you compel this production. I suppose if you are the member itself, it's a little bit easier. As you say, Reena, you're the owner of that stratum lot. You are the BMC member. But if you were a lot owner in a strata scheme wanting access to BMC records, I don't know how you would go about that, or indeed whether you could insist on that.
Yeah, that's a good point, Amanda. In this particular SMS that we had that I'm referring to, it actually does allow lot owners to be able to make an application through the entity itself to access the record. So it's actually quite an unusual SMS where it does have that. But if you think about it, Amanda, if the strata scheme is a member of the BMC, then it should have access to all the records of the BMC, and therefore probably indirectly the lot owners should be able to, because that record, if you're paying all these bills and your members are approving budgets and being directed at the BMC meeting to make certain decisions or to approve certain decisions that are being put forward by the collective, then I think that using that analogy of saying, well, this is part of the records, those records, obviously we don't get copies of all the invoices. I don't think a lot owner could probably ask that, but I think we as the member who are contributing to those bills can ask, and therefore indirectly they can be made available then for a strata search. But I think a lot of people don't really understand how BMCs work. I think a lot of managers don't even understand how BMCs work, and therefore that whole notion of keeping records and what you can ask for is another sort of, I think, quagmire. And it's also when something goes wrong and there's, that litigation between, there are many disputes in BMCs because of unfair allegations from the beginning, which again people only realise over the reflection of time that hang on, we're paying this much. And at the beginning it may have been a small amount because new buildings don't require, but as buildings age and they need to have more money spent on them, those physical amounts become much larger. And it's a very sort of vexed issue, I think, in terms of cross ownership between different entities, different members. You've got the Strata Schemes Management Act within your own thing, then you've got another piece of legislation that affects the other part, and you've got other members and other, agendas, other commercial and retail, and it's a bit of a minefield.
Yeah. But I do like that as a bit of a rule of thumb. If you're a BMC member, if you are the strata scheme, if you are the owner of the stratum lot, then you are directly entitled to these documents. Your agent is just an agent. They are not the principal. They are holding your documents. And then where an owner's corporation may access documents in their capacity as a member of the BMC, they are then holding those records. They become records of the owner's corporation, and they should be made available for inspection under the Strata Schemes Management Act. I love that. Do you think that it is better to have a single manager across the entire complex, or to have different manager for the BMC, different manager for the individual strata schemes? What's been your experience?
Yeah, well, I've actually had experience in both scenarios. So I've had it when I was the manager for all entities, and I've had it when I was the manager for some of the entities. And it depends, I think, on what is happening between the entities. When there's harmony, there's no conflict, there's no issues in terms of legal battles or whatever, then it's good to be the same manager because you're across everything. So if you go to a meeting for the commercial, you know what they've decided and why. So you actually are there hearing what's been agreed to. So then when you're at the BMC meeting, you will know if the rep is actually doing what they were supposed to do, because as we all know, there have been times where people have voted in accordance to their own wishes and not the wishes of their own entities. So that's a good thing when you're the manager for all of them, and you can see, and you understand like where each entity is coming from, because sometimes that is not imparted perhaps in the same way that the members at the meeting were really discussing. On the other hand, when there's conflict, then you become like the meat and the sandwich in some ways, because you're acting for each member and you're acting for their own interests. So you're advising them all separately. This is not good, for you. But then on the other hand, you got to say, well, this is,
Yeah.
you know, and so in a sense, you're in a bit of a conflict when there are issues arising between members. So that's, I think, the only thing that I would say, Amanda, in terms of the advantages and disadvantages of being a single manager versus being just a manager of some of the entities. But even some of the entities may not agree. Like, I'll give you an example. I had one where, you know, we managed, I think, 3 of them, and it related to some infrastructure that one entity wanted to install and the other one didn't. So, you know, like, so one scheme said yes, the other 2 said no. So even though I'm managing only just 3 of them out of the total, that can also mean that people don't agree. So that, yeah, but this wasn't a legal issue. It was just more like a spending money issue. So, yeah.
So it sounds like perhaps the more entities you represent, you are engaged as their strata manager, the higher your level of responsibility, I would say, to be attuned to situations that may put you in a position of conflict, that may be perceived to raise a conflict. And from a legal perspective, you'd have to be ready to act really quickly in those situations, because if you get in too deep in those situations of conflict, especially if there's litigation around, you may be in breach of your own contract. You may be accused of some misconduct. If you haven't picked up, oh, hang on a second, I shouldn't be talking to this entity about that entity's problems. I've just made a real blunder there. And it could mean you've got to walk away from all of the contracts that you have, which commercially could be quite painful. So for some managers, perhaps, who feel like, yeah, I really don't want to be in that position, appreciating that it may only happen occasionally, you might have a rule that you only act for that one entity just in case, because that level of responsibility is just too high.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is a public case that I can talk about, which is when I managed the Italian Forum, and we didn't manage the Strata lots, obviously, but we managed residential and commercial. And in a sense, at times they were aligned, at times they weren't. But overall, I was able, I think, to recognise and understand where each person was coming from, and not to basically betray any of their reasons or confidence, but just to basically make sure that everything was minuted correctly, so that when voting was done at the BMC, that it was pretty much in the minutes of our meetings in terms of what decisions had been agreed. Now, some strata management statements, Amanda, I'm not sure if you've come across any of these, but they actually compel you to provide your minutes of every meeting that you have to the BMC.
Minutes of every meeting that every entity or BMC member has must be provided to the BMC.
Yep.
I'm not sure.
Only the strata schemes. Only the strata schemes,
Okay.
not the strata lots, because obviously, you know, they're companies and they got, only the strata schemes. And I thought, this is really strange because, you know, and which meant that I think in this particular case, we had to sort of document things very specifically in a way that, you know, like perhaps if you weren't having to do that, you would be more open in your reasons and things like that. So, yeah, it was very interesting where this SMS compelled you. Maybe it was set up because they didn't trust the people that were at the time I don't know, but it sounds like there has to have been some previous experience of BMCs not functioning where the subsidiary schemes weren't perhaps voting the way that they had been instructed to vote, and therefore the minutes had to be provided. But then the minutes contain many other things that you don't want them to know about.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly. Gosh.
Yeah.
Records is another hotbed for conflict there, isn't it? If you are acting for the different schemes, keeping those records separate so that if there were records inspections, one entity doesn't find out about the legal advice that the other entity is getting. Look, I just think if you're not set up for it, you're going to be in a world of pain if you can't manage those situations. Great chat there about our complex schemes, building management committees. Good one for those who are involved in or managing those schemes to refer back to or share with your staff if they need to understand a little bit more about the potential pitfalls there. Shifting gears, my challenge for this week comes from a listener who posted this question to our website, and we've been waiting for this chat for a little while to get to it. I think it's a great question. Jade has asked if there are lot owners who are unfinancial because of what Jade calls arrears fees. Let's say this is interest on unpaid levies. And during an AGM, their motion to have that interest waived gets passed. Jade's asking, does that owner then instantly become financial and have voting rights during that same AGM? Or do they have to wait until the end of the meeting? Jade is acknowledging that the owner obviously couldn't vote on the motion to waive their own interest charge. But once that motion goes through, that resolution is made, are they then financial and can vote for the rest of the meeting? Great question, I thought.
Yeah, that is a great question, actually. I've never actually come across that before. But I suppose if any other resolution, once it's been passed, would be effective, like let's say when you elect a new strata committee, well, the old committee is then gone straight away. They don't have to wait till like the end of the meeting to become a strata committee member. So it sounds like they can vote, but I mean, I'm not sure about anything in the Act that says it otherwise.
Yes. When I was first considering this question, I actually had in mind the quorum requirements, which tell us that we're looking at whether we have a quorum for each motion. We're not looking at whether we have a quorum for the meeting. So it is possible that you may have a quorum for some motions, you may not. So the legislation kind of contemplates that people may come and go, the eligibility requirements may shift during the meeting. So my initial thought was, yes, once this motion has been passed, you are now financial and you can vote on the rest of the motions at that same meeting. However, I then went on to have a look at Clause 23 in Schedule 1 to the Strata Schemes Management Act. And that's the clause that tells us that voting rights cannot be exercised if contributions are not paid, contributions being levies. And in summary, it says this: a vote at a general meeting by an owner does not count if the owner of the lot was an unfinancial owner at the date the notice of meeting was given and did not pay the amounts owing before the meeting. Now, Reena, we know an unfinancial owner is defined as someone who is in arrears of levies, to summarise, including interest or recoverable expenses related to those arrears. I believe that term is defined in the Act. So the key part of this clause that has got my attention is you're unfinancial if there was an amount owing at the date the notice of meeting was given and you haven't paid that amount before the meeting. It doesn't say before the motion, it says before the meeting. So I think if you're going to apply that clause, then you need to be paid up before the meeting starts. And I've given guidance previously to owners to say you can turn up with your cash in hand. Some people find that they're in arrears by $2. Sometimes it's a 20-cent interest charge that they weren't aware of. And if you can hand that over, then you've paid it before the meeting.
Well, actually, no, Amanda, I better correct you on that now, because Macquarie Bank and Bank of Queensland don't take cash anymore. So we can't deposit that cash anymore. So what we tell people to do now is actually pay it online, show us the receipt, even if it's 20 cents or $10 or whatever it is. Because now, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but we can't take cash anymore because the banks, before we used to take the cash, take it down to the bank and deposit it the next day. Now we can't.
What do you mean by you can't? I mean, cash is still legal tender. Is that just for certain banks or for strata schemes?
No, Macquarie Bank and Bank of Queensland, which is, I think, the two main banks that most strata managers would deal with, no longer now take cash.
Yeah, I'm not sure that would be the lot owner's problem. To, play devil's advocate here, as I like to do. I'm not sure that would be the lot owner's problem. If that's your bank's problem, the owner's, not your strata manager, but the owner's corporation's bank's problem, then I am handing you legal tender to pay my bill. Maybe I don't have a bank account. There's no legal requirement that I have to have a bank account.
I think also, like, now some shops don't accept cash either. So they say that's fine, but if you don't pay by card, then we can't help you. So I'm not really sure. I mean, I don't know how the law works about legal tender, but some entities don't take cash when you go to pay over the counter. They just take credit cards and FPOS, and a lot of entities don't take cash. Like, they don't take cash, man. Like, if you're buying online, you can't pay with cash. You can only pay with credit card or PayPal or Apple Pay or some, like, I'm not sure how that works.
Yeah,
but
and then you don't buy that product and you don't do business with that company. I don't think lot owners have that choice.
Yeah.
They have to pay their levies to be able
that's
to
true.
be financial. They have to pay their levies as a matter of law. It's a statutory debt. For the owner's corporation to put barriers in the way of making that payment, I don't know that those barriers would stand up. Maybe there's a way around this, that if these are the transaction terms of the owner's corporation's bank, then the owner's corporation needs to inform lot owners of that. And, call me a strata lawyer, but maybe there's a bylaw that needs to be passed saying this is how you need to pay your levies. This is a reasonable rule that we've had to put in place to avoid this kind of mess because our bank won't take cash. You need to, I said earlier, what if you don't have a bank account? Well, I imagine you go to the post office or, and you can, if that's still a way to pay bills, pay over the counter and those funds can be deposited into the account. It doesn't solve the problem of you turning up to a meeting wanting to pay your $10 on the spot.
No, we've always used the post office. Macquarie Bank doesn't have an open bank, like it doesn't have a consumer-facing place you can go. That's always been through the post office. You just print up a deposit form. And Bank of Queensland, even though they have branches, they don't
But you're telling me you still can't give cash at the post office?
No, not into those accounts. I don't know why. I mean, the money's going into their account.
That seems crazy to me.
Yeah, I know. So I think at our next podcast, we may just try and get an update from these banks about on what authority they have to say that they won't take cash because...
Yeah. Oh, and hopefully we'll be hearing from some other strata managers who are experiencing the same thing or owners perhaps. But, I'm trying to imagine a scenario where I am a person who only wants to deal in cash for whatever personal reasons I have, and I legally need to be able to pay my levies. I just can't wrap my head around the fact that I can't go somewhere. Let's set aside for the moment that, I don't want to turn up to the meeting with this cash and give it to the poor strata manager, but I can't even go to the post office and pay my cash. I suppose I go to the bank and I can get a check.
But we've been told about it that you can't actually, the money has to be in the account before the meeting. We got advice years ago. I remember we had this, people can't just turn up to the meeting and just give you cash.
Yeah. I've had this fight before and I just rely on clause 23 and say it has to be paid before the meeting. Here, you're the treasurer. Here's my money. I've paid it. And, $10,000 is a different situation to 10 cents, but I have certainly done that as a proxy where the outstanding amount's been $2 and I've said to my client, here's a $2 coin, go and give it to the treasurer who's sitting up there at the desk, and insisted in reliance on clause 23 that I have paid my money before the meeting. The fact that you may have some internal procedures for how you account for that and deal with that ain't my problem. I am paying the owners corporation.
Yeah, no, the legal advice was that before the meeting meant it had to be receipted, and you can't receipt something.
It doesn't say that in the legislation.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, anyway. Yes, I've gone on all these tangents today.
I love it. It's a good question, but I do think in answer to that question, if you suddenly become financial during the meeting because of a motion to waive any expenses or interest that may be sitting on your account, I think clause 23 is pretty clear. We look at who's financial before the meeting, whether that's 5 seconds before or whether that's a week before. A chairperson who is refusing to recognise your vote because they've already determined at the beginning of the meeting who's financial and who's not is probably on safe ground there. And do reach out to us, those who are in the banking finance space for Strata, those who have the answer to our question about not being able to pay in cash, those managers who have found ways around this, owners who have found ways around this, do let us know. Moving on to our wins for this week. Reena, you and I had a chat about this before we hit that record button, and we have some similar wins this week. I was going to share a win about a nice surprise that I received from a colleague of mine that I don't get very often, and I think yours was maybe a bit similar. Do you want to go first?
Yeah, so I've had a few queries recently in terms of big tenders to submit proposals for Amanda. Obviously, a lot of referrals from existing clients and other clients. And you give your referees list to the entities that have asked for a proposal, and you don't know who they've rung, who they haven't rung. And this particular one, I've had a couple of them say to me, Reena, did you get the building? They rang me at such and such. I said, no, thanks. We actually have been, we have got that building, or we have been advised that they're putting us forward as a proposed manager. So, yeah, it's just nice to sort of have to be able to thank your referees, because sometimes, they do so much work. One particular building, I think, I don't know how many people rang various referees, and they had a lot of questions. So I think a lot of time could be expended by referees that sometimes goes unnoticed. So I just want to say thank you to all our referees out there, and also to understand that making a decision to change strata managers is a very important one and a big step. And so therefore I think it's good that people are contacting your referees to ask questions, and I think that we're lucky to have people that we've been working with for so many years that are able to attest to our services and our management. So, yeah, I want to say thank you to those people.
So these are people who you list on your proposal as current clients or past clients who you know are happy to say nice things about you. And sometimes they get called, sometimes they don't. But it's good to know when they do.
Yeah, and also too, what we try and do, Amanda, is depending on, the demographic of the particular strata scheme that's considering coming to us. I might say to them, well, why don't you ring these people because that's, they're in the same location as what you are or a similar type of building. So I try and make it more sort of relevant to them. But in this case, that did happen. But and sometimes, they just ring anyone on the list. But it's just nice to know that people have come back to you and said, oh, Reena, did you get that building? Or did they come back to you? Or, I had a really nice chat. And actually one of them now is going to, we haven't yet been appointed. We're proposed to be appointed, but the two chair people will now catch up and get together and talk about different things. So in a sense, it's established a relationship between two like-minded chair people that, want to talk about the different challenges in their schemes and how they could manage them in a more appropriate and fulfilling way.
Yeah, I love that. I am often asked, what steps should we take if we're looking at engaging a new strata manager? What do you recommend, Amanda? And on my list, I always say the strata managers you're chatting to, ask if you can be connected to some of their existing clients. I love the idea of having that panel of people ready to go if you're a strata manager and choosing a few different buildings so that your 2-lot scheme, you've got a great advocate there who can share that experience of being in that building, your brand new building, having been through a building defects claim with you, the BMC, the commercial building, so that you've always got someone who can share their particular experience with a client who may be going through the same thing. I think that's great if there's companies out there who aren't doing that. Good idea.
Yeah.
So my experience was this. I am regularly approached by people who I don't have the capacity to serve. I am a small practice. I am the lawyer who is performing the legal services in my practice. And as many of you know, I don't do any work for owners corporations as a rule. I now only serve owners in my legal practice. So when I'm approached by an owner or a building or a strata manager who has needs that I can't meet, I do have a list of what Michelle in my office and I call the usual suspects. We give to the manager or the owner, say, here are some strata lawyers who know what they're doing. Reach out to them and see if they can help you. And I know many of those lawyers are just as busy, just as overloaded, have wait lists in the same way that I do. And from time to time, I hear back, not very often, but from time to time, I might hear back from a lawyer who says, Amanda, so-and-so came to me. Thanks so much for the referral. But this particular lawyer who I heard from last week, I had previously received an email from him saying, Amanda, thanks so much for the referrals that are coming out of your office. I really appreciate it. And then a few weeks later, I received a phone call, a real live phone call, which turned into a voicemail because anyone who knows me knows I don't answer my phone, saying, Amanda, thank you so much once again for the further referrals that are coming out of your office. And I just thought that is such a lovely thing to think to do when we are all so very busy, and particularly to pick up the phone. I read something on LinkedIn the other day that said, phone call, that's not how we use phones these days. That's just,
that's right.
Nobody uses phones to make phone calls. We text and we leave messages and we look things up on the internet. So really lovely to receive that old-fashioned form of communication to say thank you. And I raise this because, like Reena's business, if you are a strata management business, if you're a service provider in strata, I think remembering to do things like that, to thank those who are referring work to you. We have a procedure in my office where we always make sure we know where our new clients are coming from. Was it a neighbor? Was it a strata manager? Often it's my opponent in litigation who's referring me work, which is always a nice compliment. To be able to reach out and say thank you to that person, I think is a really nice personal and business practice to adopt.
Oh, that's lovely, Matt. Yeah, we actually, I just had a referral recently from another strata manager who is in a different demographic. They're in the North Shore and they don't do anything in the eastern suburbs. So that was nice to get a referral from them. And I always refer them work as well if anyone comes to me that wants someone, in that demographic that we don't serve as well. So, yeah, it's nice to have that sort of camaraderie between strata management companies and lawyers, etc. But recently I was at one of my friends, actually, he does marketing and he's actually going to be speaking at a professional marketing conference that's coming up at the end of the month. And he invited me to go to it. And it's about professional, chiropractors, medical, legal, whatever, trying to, market themselves using AI and different types of mediums. And I'm thinking, if you think about trying to get work as an organization and giving professional services, which is a bit harder than a product per se, well, I'm not sure that who knows these days what's harder and what's easier. But to be able to have that pipeline of referrals and referees is also a very important thing. So if you think about marketing and advertising costs and how much we spend on that, and having to go to this conference, which if I'm able to, I will be going to, just to understand more about what they recommend. But it's really important to say, well, thank you to the people that are giving, because that's all that money that you can save in a sense. Because a lot of people actually in Strata, it's not about being able to get the clients, it's the capacity to serve clients, I think, sometimes is the challenge.
Yeah, so true. And that's why I do put a very intentional limit on how many clients I take on in my legal practice. I have the online side of my business with the education that we provide through these platforms and inside the membership. So I'm able to say no to a lot so that I can serve those that do come to me at a really high level. And then that's that really nice ecosystem of them then having a really great experience, referring their friends and colleagues. But it does mean that I end up with a wait list. I end up having to say no to a lot, and people are suffering. People need help. They need legal representation. They often need it very quickly. So being able to send that person somewhere where they're going to be well served is really important to me. And that person who comes back to me and says, thank you, that client came to me, we're now helping them, and the next person we're now helping, I'm going to keep sending them. They've shot to the top of my referral list. I'm going to keep sending them those people that I can't help because I know that they can. And 100% what you say about the money that you can save, not having to do any cold outreach advertising, is money that you can use in your business elsewhere. If you do end up going to that conference, I'd love to hear what it is that you learn. Any tips that you can bring back for us here on the podcast?
Definitely, Amanda. But just to talk about your comments about being happy to have your referee list that you can refer to, unfortunately, apart from the one I was referring to that has a different demographic, when people come to me and we say, we can only take you on in 3 or 6 months' time because of our pipeline of work coming in and capacity to manage, they go, who else can you recommend? And there's probably 1 or 2 people I could recommend. And then, but I always check with them first if they want to take that building on or if they've got capacity, and they say, no, I'm sorry, I don't have capacity either. So sometimes I feel I can't do what you're doing, which is to give them someone else that they could go to that could serve them well. So anyway.
Yeah, it is hard. And I've certainly had the experience where I've been referring people to somebody because I don't have the capacity, and then they're referring people to me because they don't have the capacity. And we sort of say in the office, okay, we're not sending any more referrals that way because I think we're annoying that person. But there are, the up and comers out there who I think it's on us to keep our eyes open for these people, to be finding out who they are, to keep our ear to the ground at conferences or staying connected to, even if it's just you're on LinkedIn and you can say, oh, so-and-so's just gone out on their own. They've started their own business. And I'm always very careful. I don't recommend anybody because I don't know what happens inside their business. Maybe they send the matter off to a different lawyer, a junior lawyer in the business who perhaps is not the person who I think would be best for the job. So I'm very careful not to recommend. I say, look, I know these people do this work. They may have capacity. You might be a good fit. Go and have a chat to them. I think you can do the same with Strata, and certainly in those newer businesses, if I am referring work to a new business that I know has just opened up and I want to support that business, I'm saying to the client, look, this person used to work for this big company. I saw on LinkedIn that they've gone out on their own. They would be the type that probably have capacity to really provide a great level of service. Have a chat to them. I don't know what it's going to be like, but have a chat to them.
Yeah, no, I have done that, Amanda, with someone that I do know, but normally they don't want that size building so right. It's a good, what you're saying, it's a good, in a sense, so sometimes I do refer them, I think, well, that's a good fit. I consider it a good fit, but they just don't even end up contacting them for some reason. So I'll say, did that person contact you? I said, I gave your details. Oh, no, they haven't been in touch. So you never know. It's horses for courses.
Indeed. Great chat. Thank you so much for making the time to bring all of that value to our show today, Reena.
Thanks, Amanda. It was a pleasure, as always.
And I'll look forward to catching up with you next time. Bye for now.
Bye, Amanda.
Thank you for listening to Your Strata Property, the podcast which consistently delivers to property owners reliable and accurate information about their strata property. You can access all the information below this episode via the show notes at yourstrataproperty.com.au.